Poor old Angela Rayner. She cannot seem to get herself out of the news with what's been happening with her house purchases. So we covered earlier this week the fact that she was buying a second home. So she already has two, but one of them is a rental accommodation that she has to be able to go to Parliament. So it's not really a house that she owns, it's just one that she has to gain access to the parliamentary estate easily. So I wouldn't really count that, and people calling her three houses a little unfair. Now, this has come back around again today because turns out it's not a second home, at least not according to her. It turns out that this new home that she's buying in Brighton and Hove, this little seafront flat, for £800,000, mind you, is actually now only her first house. Because, of course, the one in London doesn't really count. And her name has been removed from the deeds to the first house in her constituency of Ashton-under-Lyne. Now, what has been taught by the media about this is that her being removed from the deeds to her first house in Ashton-under-Lyne means that she pays less stamp duty for her new flat than she otherwise would. The rate for stamp duty is 5% higher if it is your second home, rather than if it is moving from one home to the other. So the stamp duty increased about 5%, which means that she's saved, by not having the deeds on her original property anymore, about £40,000 in stamp duty. So whilst I certainly have no defence for people who buy multiple properties, at least not those who are buying it with public money, that they get paid for being a public servant, I've already covered that in my original video earlier today. This also warrants some scrutiny. This definitely warrants some scrutiny because there's a couple of caveats here. Because how the HMRC defines what your main residence is isn't as clear-cut as your name is on the deeds. Because if she was still living in Ashton-under-Lyne, someone else's name was on the deeds, but her kids went to school there, she was registered there on the electoral roll, HMRC would still count it as her first house, and so she would pay the additional stamp duty on the new purchase. But this is where it gets complicated, because there's no official information on this, but it is believed that the house that she owned in Ashton-under-Lyne was something that she co-owned with her ex-husband, Mark Rayner. And if she's actually split up from him, and the reason why her name was being taken off the deeds was because it was previously on there as a consequence of the fact that she was at time living with him in this property, and is not anymore, and is potentially moving to Brighton and Hove, and that's why the name has been removed from the deeds, then it is not a second house. It would be a change of main residence. She has changed her primary residence to the new house, to the new flat, to ensure that she doesn't pay stamp duty. We don't know if HMRC are going to be investigating this or not. We've not heard anything so far about this. But there are a load of different things here that do need to become clean about. Because, again, one would assume that as a pretty prominent politician, the literal deputy prime minister, the, I guess, titular second in command. We all know the real second in command is Keir Starmer after Morgan McSweeney, and then it's Rachel Reeves, and Angela Rayner is, quite frankly, Bez at this point, who, even in her role as housing minister, essentially a lot of this gets delegated to Matthew Pennycook anyway, because people at the top of the Labour Party don't want her to have access to power, because even though she's essentially cucked herself out to the entire right-wing Starmer project, she is perceived to be too left-wing for them, so she doesn't even get access to the levers of power in the way that I think she probably should do, as somebody who has essentially lived the kind of experience one would want from a Labour Party politician of growing up poor, making the best of herself as a single mother, becoming a union shop steward, and then getting elected as a Labour MP, right? That's the kind of life you would want someone as a Labour MP to have, the life experience they would need to be a good minister, and they don't even trust her with actually enacting her own brief, where it gets delegated to people within the department anyway. But regardless, in that position, you'd expect somebody to get pretty watertight tax advice about whether or not they should or shouldn't be changing their primary residence to avoid stamp duty or not. So if you have, as the Deputy Prime Minister, been given such watertight advice, just say why you've changed your primary residence. Because if that's not the case, then it doesn't look good. As somebody, as I do, who has the values that people who have enough to buy multiple properties should pay more in taxation to be able to balance the fact that most people in this country cannot afford to buy. Now, again, I'm not one to appeal to hypocrisy, but that's the line that's going to happen from the media. The press are going to come here and say, well, you want to tax homeowners, second homeowners, you want to tax landlords more, and yet you are somebody who is deliberately removing names from deeds to try and game the system to avoid tax, potentially, allegedly, according to the accusations. That's not a good look. If it's the case that she split up with her ex-partner and that she removed her name from the deeds because she actually is moving from her constituency in Ashton-under-Lyne to Brighton and Hove, God knows why she's moving all the way out of her constituency, because, of course, it's not even close to London. That's where her current rented accommodation is at the moment. If that is the case, then it's perfectly reasonable for her not to pay stamp duty. She's not gaming the system, whether legally or illegally. Because it would be perfectly legal if she's been given tax advice saying, well, you can do this. It's not moral. It's not ethical. It's not the spirit of the regulations around stamp duty and multiple properties. But it would still look bad if you did it. Why hasn't she just said? Why hasn't she just said, look, split up with my partner. I left. I don't live in Ashton-under-Lyne anymore. It would be unacceptable otherwise. And all she's doing is allowing the speculation to fester by not clearing up, which she could do if her hands were clean incredibly easily. Incredibly easily. And I want to go back to this point that she's potentially not even living in Ashton-under-Lyne. If her main residence is moving to Brighton, that's the other side of the country to Greater Manchester. Her desire to live on the beachfront apparently takes precedence over her ability to be able to live amongst and serve her own constituents, which, quite frankly, already a lot of constituents have a pretty absent MP, especially ones who are members of the cabinet, to then renege on that kind of responsibility even further by changing your primary residence to the other side of the country. This is a pretty bad look, especially when there are precious few people who've been from the north, who've been from Greater Manchester, who've been in the position that she's in. Now, we certainly have more members of the north as cabinet ministers than we would usually, with the Bridget Phillipsons, the Jonathan Reynolds of this world, right? It's not enough, but it's some. You'd think that somebody who's proud to represent Greater Manchester would want to still live in Greater Manchester. So changing our main residence to Brighton, bit of a slap in the face for the fact that these left-behind areas of the country have dwindling representation amongst people who have the levers of power at their disposal. Especially when this government seems to not care about the levelling up process that was so important to Boris Johnson's election victory in 2019 for these left-behind communities. In current polling predictions, at current level, she will lose her seat to Reform UK at the next general election. And I don't think that's going to be made less likely by moving herself from Ashton to Brighton. None of this looks good. All of this looks bad. And again, despite my hatred of Angela Rayner for being an internal traitor within the Labour Party, I at the very least recognise that having someone of her background who's done what she's done, who is of the political persuasions as her in a position of power, is an important thing. In the same way that, despite me despising Rishi Sunak, it was good that we had somebody of subcontinental background as Prime Minister. That was a glass ceiling that's been shattered. And it undermines this when she won't even live in the area that she ideally is representing, both in their material interests as a member of parliament and I guess kind of spiritually in terms of that area of the country's representation in the cabinet. It's a really bad look, and it's just another thing to add to the pile of things that Angela Rayner has done that really has been such a giant disappointment. Not that I had the greatest of expectations, but I expected better than this. It's a real shame. It's a real shame. Again, as someone who values working class representation in politics, and again, she gets lots of classism thrown her way for existing whilst working class and northern, right? The amount of right-wingers who will say things such as, or the lefty Labour Party hate the working class even though they're not lefty. And they probably do in some cases do hate the working class, right? But when an actual working class person gets elected as Deputy Prime Minister, it's all insults. It's all classist insults that they throw in her direction, right? She's been at the sore end of a lot of bullying publicly, but she doesn't make it easy for herself when she's out here making it difficult to defend her political decisions based upon her own personal actions. And an opportunity to have a genuine working class trade unionist in position of power is being undermined by the fact that her principles, all her principles, seem to have fucking disappeared since being elected. What a shame. Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for memberships. It's just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.